Thank you for this opportunity. I truly appreciate it. I see many old friends and new friends. And actually, I was trying to figure out, I don't want to, are you, Teresa, would you two be from my in the back, 1980? 86. From my an MBA class. I haven't been teaching in the MBA program for a number of years now, but I'm going back actually in September because I'm leaving GMP. The dean has asked us, those of us who are really senior, if you will, to come back to the MBA program and sort of help rethink what we're going to be doing with that program given all that's changed around us. So I'm looking forward to that. It'll be a new experience. How many of you are actually graduates of the MBA program? And the rest of you are from executive education or? Aha. And where are my GM peers? That has been yes. And here we have some up here as well. So truly a privilege. As you know, I have to complain first in the best sense. So I've just spent 8 days in Italy. And those of you who've had me as professor know I tend to go to bed around 9 o'clock. The Italians start eating at 9 o'clock. So I'm still recovering from my 8 days in Italy because I don't think I got back to the hotel before 11:30. Just didn't happen. So you have to bear with me. But more importantly, I really love teaching at the Harvard Business School because we usually engage in conversation. We don't necessarily sort of lecture at you. So I'm going to try to do a little bit of both and make sure this is somewhat interactive. But what I wanted you to talk to your neighbor about just a little bit about what's an innovation challenge you're facing right now, and just maybe write a few words or talk to each other about it a bit so we can get engaged and you're not just all looking up here at me because this is not what I'm particularly comfortable with. The first thing I want to say, in this book actually, I guess I will start here. There are 4 Harvard graduates, and it's really a pleasure. I have nothing to do with their successes or failures, well, because these are successes, exceptional leaders. But one of the ones I want to start with is a man who actually was running Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. And when I had a conversation with him, he's a Rhodes Scholar. He's a cardiac surgeon. He's a pioneer in robotics. He's really he's a star. And when I spoke to him one day about leading, he said to me, this was during COVID, he said, "Linda, I feel like I'm leading through a fog. What does it mean to lead when you can't see, when you have no vision?" And for him, this was a totally unsettling kind of experience, not to have any vision. And he said, "I thought my job was to take charge and steer the ship, but I soon realized that was exactly the wrong thing for me to do, because I have no vision. Where am I steering it to?" And then he said, "I guess what I need to do is figure out how to hyper-empower my people to make sure that they all know that there is nothing called business as usual. There is nothing called business as usual. And we've got to keep that in mind. Instead, we all have to be innovative problem solvers." And fundamentally, that is what this book is about. How do you get people to accept that there's nothing called business as usual, and we all have to be innovative problem solvers? And one of the ways we've thought about this, and it's in the epilogue of the book, is usually when we think about leadership, and I was actually recruited to Harvard Business School by a man named John Cotter, and John taught us about the distinction between management and leadership. And he said that most organizations are overmanaged and underled. And what he meant by leadership was about dealing with change, which turns out is different than dealing with innovation, but related. He said, you got to have a vision, you communicate that vision, and you inspire people to want to follow you to fulfill that vision and create the future. And I think many of you who are in the leadership course learned that. I'm sitting right here, I'm pretty sure we talked about that. We definitely talked about that.
In 97.
Yes, in 97. So, yes, my goodness, B's.
Section B.
Section B, yes. So one of the things that I would say about that is that is true, and that is what leading change is about. And what that is we call it pathfinding. You have a vision, you know the destination, and you've got to figure out how to get there. And that's really hard to do. It turns out that leading innovation is different from leading change, and that surprised me. And leading innovation is, frankly, you don't know the destination, nonetheless, how to get there. And when I talk to many people about AI right now, it is more wayfinding than pathfinding. No one quite knows where we're going, or what the destination is going to be, or even how we're going to get there. And that is a different kind of leadership that's required. And when you're leading in that way, what you're really worried about is how do I create an environment in which people are going to be willing and able to co-create the future with me? And followership and co-creation are two different mindsets. Some of the behaviors that you need, some of the skill sets that you need are somewhat the same. In fact, they can be the same to some extent, but it's a whole different thing to think about how do I get people to co-create the future with me as a leader, as opposed to how do I get people to follow me to the future. So that is the difference that we're really talking about here in our work. And what happened when we first did this work, and I'm going to just do this pretty quickly, but my first effort, as I said, I went out to, I think I need to point it here. Yeah. When I went out to Silicon Valley, when Kim sent me out, I literally ended up sitting next to a man who worked at Pixar. It turned out he was the chief technology officer, although they don't really have titles like that. We were both stood up by the same person, and he started chatting with me and said, would you like to come to Pixar? He is now my business partner, and we're many, many, many years later. So I started studying Pixar in 1998 or something like that. And it's just been a privilege. And when in fact, and some of you may have had this case, when in fact Disney bought Pixar, one of my strategy colleagues wrote a case about this, and the purpose of the case was to prove that Disney had overpaid for Pixar, and by far. And why had they overpaid? And this is the time that I worked at Pixar. These were the movies they made, or when I was doing research at Pixar. And they basically said, my strategy colleagues, who I adore, and believe me, I'm not saying they're wrong, but I kept saying to them, I'm not sure they overpaid. What do you think they bought? And they said, well, I don't know what they bought. That's part of the problem here, because you don't know why some studios make successful movies. You know, this is kind of luck, fundamentally. So when Ed came to class and talked to them, I said, I don't actually think this is luck. I think it's actually about how the leadership thinks about their role. And what we found was, and here's Ed, and Ed was, he just turned 81. He's a marvelous, marvelous man, won every award you can win as a technologist. But Ed was the co-founder, obviously this is one of Steve Jobs' other companies. And what Ed taught me is fundamentally, he said, everybody has a slice of genius. Everybody has genius. Everybody has talents, everybody has passions. All slices are not the same size. Not trying to claim that, but everybody has a slice of genius. And you as a leader have to figure out how to unleash that individual slice of genius and make it useful to the organization. And we cannot afford to waste individuals' slices of genius. We have to take care of that. And Steve Jobs believed this too. Again, not all slices are of equal size. But once you believe that everyone has potential, that is one of the most important pieces of the puzzle mindset you need to have if you want to build an organization where everyone is really an innovative problem solver. And fundamentally, I don't think all of us believe that everybody has a slice of genius. I don't think that that's necessarily something that all, and I could give you many examples of how this played out. So Ed, when he came to class, the class first told him, you know, you shouldn't have been paid so much money. Well, you weren't worth it. He's like, okay. I said, no, they're not polite. They love to go after whomever it is. I just taught a new case on the head coach of the Celtics. He couldn't believe how people went after him. He's like, have they ever coached anybody? I said, no, they're going to eat you alive. He said, I'm used to this, I thought, but not really. But anyway, you all can find everyone's weakness. Anyhow, so Ed came to class and he described what he did and how he thought about it. And someone said, oh no, they bought talent. Of course they bought talent. He said, yeah, but I don't know that we're more talented than other people in other studios. I'm not so sure. But we do have talent because of the way we work, we do attract talent. He said it's really about more how we work. And Greg helped me draw this picture of their process. They certainly plan, they have different departments. But what's really different about Pixar is they believe that innovation only happens when you're in a community, when you really feel like you belong and you trust the people you're getting ready to work with. And they don't believe in a free agent model. They believe that filmmaking is a team sport. It's about a team. Now, these are very, very talented people, and interestingly enough, when we were doing the case on of Joe at the Celtics, he also very much talked about it being a team sport. And we're talking about people who are stars, truly stars in both these instances. So Anne actually worked with Ed, and one of the things that we see here is not only is it a team sport, but you know what? We never know where the problems are going to be, and we're going to have to iterate. We're going to have to experiment and figure out how we're going to do this. It can be a technical problem, it can be an artistic problem, whatever it might be, or it can be a business problem relating to the movie. And we just need to be prepared to experiment and learn ourselves together, to co-create, to get it done. So innovation, and we've known this forever, innovation rarely happens from some individual genius having an aha moment. Innovation is the result normally of collaboration amongst people who have different expertise, different ways of thinking, and those people are willing to experiment and learn together because they do have some sense of shared purpose, and there is some sort of mutual trust and influence that happens in these environments that allow us to be willing to take risks together, because it's a risky business. And as we all know, all movies, all of the innovations we try don't work. So this is really what we wrote about in Collective Genius, the art and practice of leading innovation. How do you as a leader use yourself as an instrument to build an environment in which people are going to be willing and able to collaborate, experiment, and learn together, which is different from followership. So we did that and finished that book, and then we came to the world that we're living in today. And it's a world where there's a great deal of change, as you all said, and a great deal of uncertainty, which is actually kind of different than change. We don't even know what the change is going to be. And when we began to collect more data, a couple of things happened. Many people, we oversampled in Collective Genius on tech companies. But we also had, it was funny, and we did a case about the man who was the chief marketing officer of Volkswagen. I had met him when he was at Fiat. I was just with him in Italy because he's now the CEO of Kering. So we were talking there. He's moved from auto industry. He likes brands to luxury. He would worry about how I was dressed when I was doing the work there with him. But again, sticking around and trying to see people as they evolve in their careers over time. But again, he understood about this collaboration that needs to happen. He's also working in an industry where there are people who are, quote, in some ways thought of as special, very creative. But indeed, what he's worried about is how do we scale, how do we deal with whatever we're trying to innovate about. So what we found when we went back to look at and do more research is a couple of things. Many people said to us, well, we're not Pixar, we're not Google, we're not whatever. We're an established company, we're regulated. Can we innovate as well? So we said we would oversample on established companies. We also have many entrepreneurial ventures in this book, but we oversampled on established organizations, many of them regulated, many of them over 100 years old, to see what was going on. And the focus was, how do you transform your organization to be more innovative? And when we said this, very explicitly looking at the question that many of these established companies, entrepreneurial ones have the same problem though. How do you make sure that that innovative solution you come up with can actually be scaled? It becomes a reality. It gets launched, it gets commercialized. It has the impact, if it's a social organization, that you hope it will have. So this book is about how do you make sure that those innovative solutions actually do what you want to do, fulfill that purpose that you intended for them to fulfill. So that is what Genius at Scale actually refers to. And again, we looked at leaders. In this book, we purposefully looked at leaders who were senior, also middle managers, and some individual contributors. And in fact, the individual contributors, met them about seven or 8 years ago. They have an AI robotics company, which I understand is the next hot thing. So I'd love to be hot. Glad I've been studying them for a while. They're individual contributors, because it turns out, going back to these slices, that people at different levels can exercise their leadership in ways that allow us to have innovative solutions that get scaled. So that's what I mean by scale, that it actually becomes a reality. But what I want you to pay attention to here are really two things. One is, good ideas can come from anywhere. Anybody can have a slice of genius. There were two parts about this. One was, people inside are going to have ideas, and the other was, people outside are going to have ideas that we need to bring in, and we can't say not invented here. So we're going to have to get ideas from wherever we can get them. The important one that I think made the difference in this company is step number 8. Labs is a stepping stone. There's nothing precious about us in labs. We kind of have this special place and get to do things differently and operate with a different cadence, etc. But we're simply enablers of all the rest of you. So all what you see inside, those are all the capabilities that MasterCard did not have. And they needed to get them quickly. And they weren't going to have time to build them internally fast enough to be competitive because they wanted to have some advantage. So they also then begin to do a lot of scanning and sensing to find out who out there might we partner with to get access to those capabilities. And so this was their picture of, these are all startups. 20, startups in engagement and security and efficiency. They had to identify all of these players that they could potentially partner with. And then they began to build out the ecosystem and they needed bridgers to work with all of these different partners, and then catalysts to help think about what I will show you becomes the ecosystem. So one of the things, if you think about Microsoft and OpenAI, what often happens in companies is the senior people work out the deal and the governance and the IP. But then if you don't have bridgers throughout the entire organization, Copilot is not going to be a very good solution unless you have people who can work between Microsoft and OpenAI, who can co-create. It's not something, you need it all the way down through the organization as you're trying to embed this. And that's why we hear so many organizations telling us we don't have bridgers, so who can help us bring these capabilities in. And by the time they built it, this is not a very pretty picture maybe, but if here's MasterCard, they started with the startups, but as they moved around the world, they said, we have to earn the right to do business in these different countries. We have to earn the right to work with these different kinds of customers. And so they ended up having to get telecommunication providers, people who could work with government. Now they have some of this anyway because they're a regulated business, but in each instance, as they went into a new country, they really had to develop what some of you may have been educated about when you were at the school, contextual intelligence. You really need to know what's salient about it. Just because you're profitable in one geography does not mean at all that you'll be profitable in another. You have to go into that geography and learn through experimentation and build the relationships you need. So that's how they did that. So this is what I mean about you may have to partner in some instances with particular companies or organizations, but you also may have to build some coalitions of players to actually create an environment. Like with electrical vehicles, a lot of the sustainability kinds of solutions require working across sectors. And if you don't have people in your organization who know how to do that, I know that the CEO, he was the CEO of Renault before he became the CEO of Caring, Luca, wrote a letter to the EU. I don't know if any of you saw that letter, to the EU citizens saying, you know what, if Europe's going to be competitive, I think they included you in that, and have a place, we as citizens need to insist that government, NGOs, and private sector work together to upskill people so they have the skills they need for us to go into e-vehicles, to make sure we have enough charging stations. All of this work, no company alone can create the environment that will be required to really make e-vehicles successful. And when we were actually in Dubai speaking at the Prime Minister's, the government summit, the big issue with EVs there is that insurers don't know how to insure electric vehicles. They don't know what to charge for that, and consequently people can't get loans for those. So as you begin to look at what the ecosystem is that is required to do something that you as one company wants to sell some electric vehicles, you discover you're in an environment that is not really conducive to what you're trying to get done. So we need more leaders like yourselves who can work across the sectors to create the kinds of spaces or environments necessary for this work. Now I want to end here in terms of stories. There are many more I could tell you about, because we had all kinds of leaders. I will, these are some of the leaders we looked at in the Catalyst section. Vineet was, and his wife Anupama, they were in our first book on collective genius. He was the head of, he was the CEO of HCL Technologies. Now he has gone into primary education in the villages of India and is determined to put 20 million smiles on 20 million faces. And using very much, he's actually using a lot of technology and AI to help personalize the educational experiences of children in the villages. But it's all really about the teachers first and giving them the resources. They have 50 kids, they need to know how each kid is responding on the range, and so he's using AI to get that done. I don't know that I have a favorite story. Ndidi is creating, trying to create, using tech to help agribusiness and make sure that food isn't scarce across the continent of Africa. I was just in Italy, as I told you, and I always study people that I like to study. I'll just end with Massimo. I highly recommend Massimo's restaurant. They won the best restaurant in the world twice. And he has, I think now from this, they started in Modena. And for those of you who like fast cars, Ferrari is made there, for instance. So there's Massimo in the middle. When I did go, I got to eat a lot. And he made me ride in his fast cars. I'm not a fast car rider, but anyway, I did. But what I wanted to say is, what they're scaling is their values. Massimo and his wife Lara, they together have built this one restaurant, and they are using that restaurant as a platform to really improve Modena's economic prosperity.